Welcome back to the second part. Remember, we are focusing on defining the relationship between research question and hypothesis and formulating good research question and hypothesis. So, how do we create very good research question? You must look carefully for issues that are of interest to you. Depending on your field, there are always things that are interesting to different people. So make sure you find what is interesting to you. Think of the environment you are and what is also important to you. Remember, don't pick issues that are too personal to you. It might lead to bias. Okay? But you should look for things that you find interesting, that you know when you start researching it, you will be motivated to continue doing the work. One way to get this kind of thing is to explore some keywords using scholar.google.com. So remember, if you go to google.scholar.com, you can put in some keywords. We're going to do some practice about this later, but just to have this at the back of your mind, that one of the ways by which you can start exploring the existing literature is by looking at works that has been done by other people in your area, by examining literature using the web link or the website scholar.google.com. It will come up with scientific literature about specific keywords. Just like you use Google to search for things, you use scholar.google to search for scientific literature around specific keywords. Once you have done that and you have read a bit and you know what is the contemporary literature in your area of interest, then start asking questions. Based on what you have read, start asking questions. Why this? Why? What is causing that? How is this happening? Are there differences in this? So let's look at some examples. Once you have itemized, you have stated those questions, they might be very broad, they might be very unwieldy. So you need to start refining them and focus them carefully. So if we look at the case of particulate matter in River State, I'm using River State because we all know about the black soot issue. Where are the sources of particulate matter emission in River State? This is such a broad question, but you start from the general question, the big question, the broad question, and you begin to narrow them down. So if I start with that, I could go on to say, what is the spatial dynamics of particulate matter distribution in Port Harcourt? How is it moving? How is it changing over space? How is its concentration distributed over space? Okay, how is the black soot distributed over space? What about over time across the same place? What about if we combine place and time together? What is the dynamics of this distribution over Port Harcourt? Okay, we could go on and say, okay, in terms of air pollution, are there differences across urban, peri-urban, and rural area? We're still trying to narrow it down. These are not yet fantastic research questions, but we're still working on them. So ask as many questions as possible and try to start narrowing down, taking note of the 4 characteristics. It must not be too broad, it must not be too narrow. It must be specific, it must be relevant, significant, and it must be interesting. It must be creative, and it must be unique. Okay, so these are just examples to help you see how you start with a very big, broad question and you start bringing it down to narrower and narrower questions that are not too narrow and not too broad. Okay, If we look at another example, what is the pattern of school performance or healthcare facility or crime in River State? That's very big. So let me just pick one, for example. What is the pattern of school performance in River State? Maybe you are interested in looking at whether where children go to school, the area they go to school, affects their performance. You want to see, is there a pattern to it? So you might pose the question, is the distribution of school performance in River State, or much more specific, Obiakpo local government, different from random? You want to see whether there is a specific pattern to it, or it's just a mere random distribution. Because if it is not random, it means that there is a process that means that makes some students perform better in a certain area than students in another area. Are there places where there are more reported cases of domestic violence? Okay? Then that's a broad question. Then you might narrow it down. Are the reported incidents of domestic violence in Choba community randomly distributed? You want to see whether the location where the household is, whether there is a kind of contagion. If you live in an environment where there is domestic violence, then there is tendency that you might engage in domestic violence. I'm speculating here. I'm not making an assertion. So please note, we are still making up questions. Okay? We are trying to formulate research questions that can be investigated. Therefore, when you are formulating your question, have these three things at the back of your mind. Triple A. Avoid yes or no question. So, if you remember those 4 characteristics, I'm now giving you 3 things to help you narrow them down so that you have it at the back of your mind. Never ask a question, a research question, that you can answer with a yes or no. Ask those questions with potentially multiple answers, which means they are arguable. Ask those questions that require you to explain or defend your answer. They are complex and they are arguable. Ask questions that you can handle within the period of your research, within the stipulated time. You don't want to ask questions that you have to write a book before you answer it. You want to ask questions that within the period stipulated for your research, you can complete the work. So these are very, very important. Avoid yes or no. Ask those that requires you to explain or defend them. Ask questions that you can answer within this stipulated time of your research.